Hey there, Ddraig back with a video about a new issue for Overhaul released on the 26th of Jan 2020 by Virtutes. The End Time Overhaul is another new take on Total War Warhammer 2. So just in case this is your first taste, what is an overhaul? Briefly, a modder decides you'd like to change how the core game works by changing all the combat values from melee attack, speed, unit models, you get the picture, into his new model which fits his personal idea for the game. There's a fair few of these overhauls around, and some of the most popular mods are overhauls. And they're also the most complicated depending on how they would change the game. So the End Times overhaul, which is what I show you at today, and in this video it is to go over the various units. In this video I'm going to look at all these new units at the start of each section, and then I'm going to talk about some more vanilla units and how they compare to the vanilla experience and this new overhaul. Pretty much I'm going to give you my thoughts based on my experience with mods and vanilla gameplay, as I can't test every faction in depth as is needed because this video will be 5 or 6 hours, and that's just probably per faction. So get a Bugman's brew and settle in, this could take a while. The next video, of course, as I like to do, is to show off the campaigns of some factions which I've started. These will be roughly 50 plus turns into the campaigns, and I can show you how I'm getting with each faction, and so show off some of the campaign mechanics as well, and just a general feel of how I think the overall changes them. As always, all the units on show will be on ultra settings, so let's begin with the Beastman. Before we get into those new units, just a quick note, this is just a guide, a basic guide on how the factions work. I will show off the stats, I'll compare some stats to the vanilla settings, and just gives you an idea on how they work. It's not a complete guide by any means, it's just a brief glance of how the units and how the factions are different than in vanilla settings of Warhammer 2. So as mentioned, at the start of each faction, I will start off with the new units that the Duke has created for his overhaul. Not all of the factions have new units, but I highlight all of them which I find, and then I'll discuss a bit more about the vanilla settings when it's compared to the overhaul. So let's start off with the Beastman and the one and only unit, the Corngores. So as you can see from the unit card, there's a large difference in combat stats for the vanilla Warhammer. A great increased melee attack and significant charge bonus as well. While this unit does not show the huge differences in the overhaul, you can clearly see the amount of damage this unit can put out. Add the fact that they have the Mark of Khorne ability, boosting melee attack to over 100 and a small bonus to damage, but makes them pretty much defenceless as they try and rip and tear their way through. This unit speed is at 45, which is quite quick for units in the End Times overhaul. In comparison, Empire units of Swordsman is 38. So I would use this as a support damaging unit. That way you can have a unit of chaff, take some of the damage, and then charge this unit in behind to clear up the mess. As going 1v1 against units means they're more than likely kill a lot of things, but they'll probably die in return, or at least take too much damage. On a quick word of all legendary hordes across all factions are complete combat monsters. So as an example, here's Kazrak, and as you can see compared to vanilla, his stats are pretty monstrous. But it's not unique to the Beastman or to any particular faction. Let's pull up a new example of Karl Franz, and as you can see, similar huge stats differences. Well, I just thought I'd just mention these legendary hordes. I'm not going to be concentrating on these, I'll be concentrating on the normal everyday units themselves. But on the whole, if you think of the legendary hordes, think of them like the ones I've just shown. Well, obviously examples such as the mages are obviously a bit weaker. So the Beastman faction, what tweaks does this overhaul do? Well, most of the standard chaff units are 160 strong, and as you can see the units differ a lot to vanilla settings, as they are not terrible in combat. Both is set to a new balance to the units, as the battles are a bit younger in the End Times overhaul compared to vanilla. I'm going to be taking information from the Duke's own breakdown of each faction to show his vision. So in this case, it is a fast moving faction with tons of charging and aggressive units, but they have low armour so they cannot do well at a long fight. So pick a target and move around the enemy as you can. Dropping out after the initial hit is a viable and a way run away and then charge again. As you can see, the standard unit of chaff compared to vanilla, the Ungor Spearman, have decent stats compared to the vanilla counterparts, with much better defense and melee attack. This is quite true over most of pretty much all the factions, and as you see as I go further into them. While the combat damage is no different, it's just the basic melee stats which are much better, and of course that very good speed, as the Beastmen should be, as they are very heavy on manoeuvrability and attacking into the flanks. For another example, here are my favourite units of the Beastmen roster, the Minotaurs. As you can see, they're wrecking balls on a charge, but with that really melee defence, they are quite vulnerable to a counter-attack, or if they get knocked down by specialist anti-charge units. You can also note here the speed of this particular unit, as they're much quicker than the Minotaurs in vanilla. They're actually almost up to high light cav speeds. So whenever you are playing this mod, always remember to check out your units thoroughly if you're used to the vanilla settings, or indeed any of the overhauls you may have played before. Another thing to note, leadership is much higher here compared to vanilla settings. On the battle itself, making flanking charges on an enemy is a bigger debuff to their leadership, and if they get attacked from the rear it's even bigger, and this is how you break the front lines. Off to the beautiful lands of Bretonnia now, and some new units to look at. First up, our new infantry choice, the Shield Bearers. This unit shows of a new type of ability called Tanky, which kind of speaks for itself. It is a unit made to hold down the front and stop the attack, and will not break as easily as other troops, even when they get flanked. As you can see, this is a well-rounded unit, and as a general theme for new units, the Duke is clearly adding a unit or two where he thinks there was a gap in the particular roster. So it's pretty obvious where you put this unit right at the front of the fight. Next we come up to the Mounted Squires. These are wannabe knights of Bretonnia, desperate to do something completely foolish in battle, and hopefully gain some sort of notoriety which leads them to becoming an actual fully-fledged knight. This unit may look powerful if you're judging it against vanilla settings, but I will show you more Elite Cav, so you can just see the stats there. Clearly this particular unit has a weak weapon strength but a substantial charge, and have a buff which increases charge even more and is pretty much on all Bretonnian cavalry, except for the cheapest mounted yeomanry, which I will show here as a comparison. This cav lacks the armour but does possess a silver shield. While on the topic of armour, this is different in the End Times Overhaul, as to make armour piercing more important, the damage reduction is raised by 80% from 50%, so if you got a low armour it means you will definitely get killed easier. Also, you'll notice the cavalry force is 100 strong, 40 more from vanilla settings. This is common for all factions, as any particular cavalry force is usually at the 100 model strength, and the more the very elite have slightly less. Naturally for Bretonnia, it's all about the cav, but the melee infantry are a bit more powerful, and with the men at arms, you can see they are a bit tougher, but are still cheap at 325 points. And actually act like a bit of an anvil, even though a lot of the factions who specialise in this type of combat, namely the dwarves, do it a lot better, but at least they can hold the iron for a bit longer than you would expect. While the differences are not massive, they are slightly better in defence and slightly better melee attack. So just something I thought I'd quickly point out for this particular faction and this particular unit. So let's have a look at the high end of the cavalry. And here we got the Grail Knights. As you can see, they have pretty much Yord level stats, with massive combat prowess across the board, but only 40 models for this elite cav. And over pretty much all the factions, this is probably the highest tier you can see. If you look deep into the stats, you can see they've got much more armour than vanilla settings, and the leadership is much higher. Speed is also increased, but as you can tell from the few units we've looked at, this is pretty much over the entire faction itself. But when you compare this combat stats to the vanilla stats, you can see what a massive difference it really is. Just as a quick reminder, the Lance formation is still as potent as ever, and a bonus to charge of 5. This is usually the case across bonus units. with yes extreme anti-infantry and large bonuses. In fact, as far as I can tell, 5 is pretty much a standard for these bonuses. The first unit of the Dark Elves, we have the Blackguard Greatswords, very high melee attack, and a sizable defense buff. Unbreakable and Encourage with substantial AP values of 29. The obvious question is, how do they compare to a similar type of unit, the Executioners? Well, as you can see, pretty well on the whole, as the damage is the same and the melee attack is actually lower at base value, but they are quicker, allowing you to get to those flanks easier. The Great Swords, however, do not have Murderous Mastery, which is a vital stat for the Dark Elves, so let's have a closer look at that particular ability. When it procs, like it does vanilla, you can see the huge damage debuffs it provides, making the Dark Elves unstoppable killing machines. So you need to make sure they are significantly weakened by the time this procs. If not, they can quickly overwhelm you and pretty much kill the entire roster. So the Great Swords are a solid unit, and actually 100 points cheaper than the Executioners, but like their murderous prowess make them weaker during the endgame. So as you might have guessed, the Dark Elves are a very aggressive faction, much like they are in, of course, vanilla, with fast strikes and a lot of potential damage, especially when that murderous prowess procs. They have typical great armor piercing damage on their ranged attacks, but all these units are at a maximum range of 130, except for one example, which is the Originz of Renown version of one of the shades. And with the Reaper Bolt Thrower as the only artillery option, where you need to get closer to the enemy to cause the damage. Naturally, they have the monsters, which helps, and here's the example of a tanky Hydra, which as you can see is double the health pool of the vanilla settings. With actual melee defense, compared to the very weak melee defense of the vanilla Hydra, huge melee attack, and the damage is increased as well. And they can really chase down a unit at that 70 speed. Also, if you look carefully at the bottom of the stats for the Overhaul version of the Hydra, you can see it's a wall breaker as well, which is common across most of the arch monsters of the Overhaul. So this is the ideal fast flanking unit. So let's look at another example. The Dark Elves, the Cavalry. Well, it's not as potent as other factions, and here you can see the Cold One Dread Knights as an example. They are still quite severely buffed, with Silver Shield compared to the Bronze Shield. Speed is obviously increased, as is the standard, and they're got more melee attack and melee defense, but they also keep the balance that they have in vanilla settings. So the idea is just as you would play in vanilla. Make sure you try to get onto any missile units as quick as possible to shut them down, while you get your own forces in range. And then make sure you kill the cheapest and easiest things to kill quickly, so you get that murderous prowess to proc, and then it's almost game over. The other stubborn dwarves now, and I can sum up the faction on the whole with one unit card as this is a new unit, the Shield Breakers. At 800 points, just look at that insane melee defense. Yes, this is the Dowie Anvil. If there was any doubt, the Duke has made them very, very tough. The removable rock of the Warhammer Road now lives up to their reputation even more. As you can see from this unit card, they may act for damage of some other units we have looked at, but getting them out of the way is a mighty challenge for the enemy. With that high melee defense and high enemy attack as well, they will surely chip away at you, and if that's not enough, they have vehicle fortification, allowing hit points to renew as well. Next we have the Black Power Rangers, a long range damaging unit, and as you can see, not too bad in the combat stakes either. Even having Stalk to get around, which allows them to really get in behind or to the flanks to get that damage down. While I'm talking about gunpowder units, it should be stated that this type of firepower has significant knockback of the enemy, which really slows down a charge, and of course disrupts the formation like you wouldn't believe. Naturally, they can survive sometimes, but it's really interesting and makes you think about charging this unit and similar types more carefully. Also, as a general rule, I have noticed a more flatter arc to black powder units and crossbow units, so they won't go over front ranks as easy as it was in vanilla. The faction itself, plays how you'd think, with even more greater emphasis on holding the line, as a standard dwarf warrior, shown here, have a 50 plus melee defense, and of course that tanky talent, making them the cheapest front line, difficult to shift. Also, they have miners, and have been given a helping hand by the Duke. And they still have the old defense, but nice bit of AP damage, so they actually do some decent damage against the opposition. And they also have the wall breaker trait, which I really like about this particular overhaul. A nice addition by the Duke. It's kind of simple and obvious when you think about it, but really makes this unit viable as a cheap way to attack the wall even in the 8 game. While Quarrels are still decent missile units, due to the changes in damage, they only have 7 AP values compared to the much higher for any black powder weapons. They're still very useful at taking down chaff or low armoured units. Just beware of the benefits of the more higher tier missiles. So let us look at the dwarf cannon before we leave them. As you can see here, that the range is increased to 600 and the missile strength has almost doubled compared to the vanilla settings. And they also doubled the ammunition, which is an interesting choice. And as you can see from the dwarves being dwarves, they're still very good at melee attack and melee defense, even though there's only a fair few of them in this particular unit. So damage is much higher for any cannon unit, and this is not just for dwarves. If you go to the Empire, which we will be going to next, you will see something similar across that faction and other factions as well. So let's move on to the classic faction of the Warhammer world, the Empire. And the first unit is the Imperial Foot. Heavy armoured with great stats, worthy of any Ddraig, but at 1,400 cost, so much more expensive than the Ddraig versions. With the Encourage mechanic, and 5 anti-yarage bonus, and also good AP values of 35, but are really slow, making them a solid pick to show up a flank or strengthen the first or second back line. And of course, they can do an equally good job at defending a viable unit. And if you want even more high defense, then take the other new unit, which is a Riky Foot. They do not hit as hard as the previous unit, but are tougher and have a shield, making them a great front line stopping unit. Both have the buff for the Empire, increasing defense all around them and making them immune to psychology, a very valuable buff in any army. Also, one unit of Cav, the very hard hitting Knights of the Black Bear, who are monsters on the charge, but again, not a unit you want to even sustain combat as a weapon, so it's definitely a unit to hit and run, even though their high armour and shield means they can take a hit if needed. So as a faction, there's some noticeable changes in how combat works in the Overhaul, such as the Spearmen can brace against all units, so they have the expert charge defense, and are slower at attacking than swords, which are much faster, and also possess a decent charge across the board. Of course, being the Empire, they have a wide range of tools in their toolbox, and have a lot of black powder weapons, which, as I've mentioned before, are highly useful in this mod. The free militia have a short range but a strong damaging attack, meaning you have to get very close to the enemy and put them in the ideal place to make them make full use of their pistols. And also, possibly not as combatant effective in close combat, but we can still do a job. While on the subject of pistols, the pistoliers are very effective with great damage, but do not have a skirmish option, so they don't automatically retreat. So always check for units you used to using in vanilla settings or other overhauls, as this has caught me out while I've been doing my tests. Other notable units I want to make reference to is the Hellblast of Oregon, which is truly obscene amount of damage you can do, but at a shorter range. And last, we should just have a quick talk about Demigryph Knights. As you can see, compared to vanilla settings, not much has changed. We've got high leadership, but as to cater for the changes to how that works, as I've mentioned before. We've got much higher melee attack and defense, so they're pretty decent in the combat. More on the defensive side. Still keeping up good weapon strength, and of course on the charge they are quite damaging. And just to reiterate the model count, as you can see they have 48 models compared to 32 vanilla. On the whole, much bigger unit count for this mod, especially when it comes to cavalry. Over to the very green and mean greenskins now. First unit to talk about are the Forest Goblins. A unit that can stalk and has 200 head count, and surprisingly good defense, making it pretty decent at slowing down the enemy as a small roadblock. However, they have 0 hit points per model and almost non-existent armour, and the damage is obviously weak, being goblins. So they won't be killing much, but they can still hold the line slightly. On from this is the Forest Goblin Archers. Much the same type of thing as standard archers, quite low range at 115, but half decent missile strength, as long as you're not hitting armoured targets, as they only have 1 AP. This just goes to show how big a difference is between the gunpowder, which have high AP, and normal missile units have. The next group of units is the field of the Acker Spears in faction. So here we have the Orc Spear Boys. While they're not the greatest combatant, compared to the rest of the units we have seen, they are certainly a step up defensive force, with a lot of punch, but with a small bit of AP at 8. And then we can move on to with more damage and another bigger boost in stats is of course the Biggins with Spears, adding some more meat to attacks, and they can of course be used on the flanks to defend against cavalry, and quite a fearsome defensive they are. And the last unit to have a look at, well, of the new units, is we have the gigantic spiders, who are pretty much what you think they are. Very quick, big spiders, in a group of 20, which can scurry around the enemy and mission everywhere. And of course, they hit very hard and charge. Pretty decent combat stats, and even got some armour. They're not having got huge damage on their weapon strength, but they can definitely find your home in your armies. With the units themselves quite spread out to represent the Acker order of the greenskins, and of course they have a natural greenskin toughness, so a very good health pool overall, especially when it comes to the orcs. When we do suffer, we've got the Acker heavy firepower, such as the gunpowder. As mentioned, that knockback and buff stats means the AP range is quite limited. But of course, the ever amazing Goblin Doom Divers are always a good choice. To counteract this, you need to use your fastest units to get as close to the enemy as quick as possible to shut them down, which of course is where the Goblin Wolf Riders excel at. As you can see here, they have potent might of the Savage Orcs, which can do huge damage, and are fast by yakking armour, making them very, very vulnerable to missiles. I need even more protection in this hovel to get the best out of them. While their cavalry, still not up to the standards of others, is cheap, and as you can see from this example, is still potent on the charge, and of course they got some decent combat stats, but are very slow. With quite a complete roster already, we've only got one extra unit to talk about, the Warriors. Pretty much a different version of a Spearman, but obviously equipped with swords. Tried a different way of blocking up the enemy on the cheap. Still half decent, with good armour, but jacking massive punch. We do have the End Times new martial prowess, which adds considerable buffs to the high elves from the off. The faction itself is a very good high damage, and is set up by the Duke to be one of the best range factions of them all, as all of their bows have 200 range, meaning they can pretty much outrange any other faction. But if they get into a shootout with any black powder unit, you might think about ducking. I even know, as you see from this example, the missile damage is formidable, but low AP across the board. So when we look at the stats for Swords Masters of Hoeth, as you can see, they're very, very high from the off, but remember, they have that martial prowess. So add those values onto that, and you can see that this unit is formidable to say the least. And of course, this transfers to all high elf units, and especially when you're talking about the yeet of the units. I'll just talk about one more of the most famous of the units the high elves have, which is of course the dragons. And here is the most powerful of them all, the Star Dragon. And as you can see, compared to vanilla settings, this particular unit is quite beastly to say the least. Fast, with ridiculous melee attack and melee defense, and the weapon strength is almost double again. This unit, as you can see, have of course Wallbreaker to keep it along with that theme, and they can fire while moving, which, let's face it, kind of makes sense for a dragon on the whole. And when it comes to the fire breath, which is of course what they mean by the fire while moving, it has unlimited uses. but they have a cooldown of 22 seconds, so focusing all your damage on this particular unit is probably a good idea from the off. With no new units to talk about for the Yzerman, let's have a look at the standard Saurus fighters, which are just renamed from your standard choices of Yzerman. As you can see, this version has, of course, the traditional better melee attack and melee defense, but not as tanky as you might think, this being the non-shielded version. The weapon strength is the same as vanilla, but as you can see, the health pool is 5,000 more than the standard version, means they can take a bit of a battering. So just like in vanilla, to compensate for the swollenness of the Saurus, you have the skinks. And the skinks here are pretty much the same speed, but they have better melee stats and melee defense. And the missile is almost 3 times as strong, but remember this weapon has particularly low IP, as only brawl darts. But with that poison applied, they can definitely still do a job. But if you're thinking about Yzerman, you're thinking about the big dinos in the end times. So let's have a look at them. Here let's start off with the old Feral Bastiladon, and as it should be, it's a walking tank. As you can see, compared to vanilla settings, there's a few subtle changes. They are quicker, they have much better melee attack, and that melee defense is something to be taken into account, as they are now definitely a tank. With 80 defense, they are very tough to get through, and they also have 5,000 more hit points than the standard version, meaning you can put this in the front and yet it do work, and the enemy will take a while to get through it. Also, you can click the Primal Instincts button, which pretty much puts them into Rampage, but boosts their damage stats across the board. Make it a bit much, click that button, forget about it because you can't actually control it anymore, but at least it's going to kill something. Handy if you want to finish off a fight quickly, or if you think pressing this button will turn the battle into your favour. And of course, let's have a look at the big dino itself, the Dreadsaurian. As you can see, damage is ramped up even more, and the melee attack and melee defense is ramped up even more again. At 90 speed, this is a very fast monster, and can catch most elite cavalry even in this overhaul. So it's particularly potent, but of course that large hitbox is exactly the same, so it can definitely hurt if you catch it. Let's move to Norsca, and a couple of new units to the roster. First up is the Bondsman, a decent fighting unit, shielded, and with good decent melee stats as well. And the damage is a step up than a standard Empire unit. To boost their combat prowess even more, they have the Rage ability, which adds even more melee stats to their original stats. They also have the Shield Whirl, a very handy ability when they reach a spot, allowing them to negate a charge from the front. Just remember, this is completely turned off even if they move a bit. Next unit is the Huskors, a more defensive minded unit this time, making it ideal frontline rank force. And as an added bonus, you can add the Marks of Chaos to this unit. And of course, further down the line, this is exactly the same thing that will happen for the Warriors of Chaos. So let's have a look at each one. First up is Tzeentch, adding a bit more damage resistance and parry chance at the expanse of armour and melee defence. Next up, we have Mark of Slaanesh, which gives much better melee defence, and they are quicker, but again sacrifice the armour. Then we have Tnergal. He adds more regen and more damage and more armour, makes the unit much slower. And of course, the last is Khorne, for the full auto attack and more damage, but sacrificing pretty much all their melee defence. Each one of these marks can be set on each unit at the start of the battle, and can also be transferred to the champions and some other units in the Norscan roster. This way you can tailor your particular units to exactly how you need at the start of each battle. The Norscans are a rowdy bunch, so they have no real formation fighting as they're feral humans down south. They rely on more physical power and the superior health to get the job done. With the obvious weakness to range, as the hunters shown here, only a very short short range on these javelins, and pretty much this is the longest range weapon they have. But at least they do have that anti-arch buff. This of course means they rely heavily on their monsters to do the work. So let's check out the skin rules. Fast and highly effective combat units. But of course they still got that low model count. Or you can use a more defense minded familiars as a more infantry choice, and mix them in with your marauders and other units in the front rank. Again, they can be applied to the marks of chaos to this unit, means you can change how the unit plays pretty much from the start of every battle. Onto the Skaven now. So what are the new units they have to play with? Let's start off with Death Vermin, who are the personal bodyguard of Trench Cleaventail, with great stats across the board, but with a nod to the low damage. Other than that, they're heavily armoured and with a silver shield with great defence. They are a tough unit to break down and share similar stats to this other new unit, the Red Guard, who defend Creek Headtaker. Both of which are former units, but they act for killing power to make them amazing. As a small note here, they do have the ability, like all Skaven units, to run away with their Scurry ability, giving a plus 12% speed boost, which means they can escape a lot of units on foot, as Skaven are a very quick faction. Let's move on to some missile units now, and we have the Gutter Runner Assassins and the Swinger version of that particular unit. Swingers first, which have a low AP damage, but are really good at queuing out for your armour units. And of course, very quick, which really takes advantage of that scurry away buff when they need to. While the Assassin's version has even more DPS, but shorter range stats with their stars, but they are very similarly skilled in combat, so choose a version that fits your needs. And the last unit of the new ones we can look at is the Bone Breakers, Rat Ogres, which have been overgrown until they form these huge lightning quick hard hitting troops. Massive charge bonuses and Wall Breaker make them very handy in a siege. Any flank will be wary when this unit takes the field, as they pretty much go through any unit. With one of the largest array of toys of any faction, there are a lot of options for this mod. They emphasise the harder hit units, but they are pretty weak when they get hit. So another example for hard hitting units, and another personal favourite of mine, the Ratwing Gun, with 423 damage, but terrible stats elsewhere. But being on the end of this weapon is no fun whatsoever, especially when you take account the gunpowder changes. Before we move on, let's have a quick look at the Skaven Slaves. As you can see, they're not completely terrible, and can actually got pretty decent melee attack, so they can actually hit something they get in contact with. These are especially effective if they got against the old defense units, as this is a ridiculously cheap unit as they are in vanilla, and I can actually take a few models down. Across this mod, most of these type of units, such as the zombies and this particular unit, which have traditional awful stats, are actually boosted up, so they can actually do some damage, and while the enemy try to grind through them, they may use more models than you may think. So let's go into the desert now with the Tomb Kings. With no new units to talk about, let's do a bit of an overview of some of the other units. To jump back what I was saying about Skaven Slaves, here you see the Skeleton Warriors, showing off their better melee attack and defense, and they have that tanky ability as well. With the superior healing of the Tomb Kings as their army ability, and of course magic, means they can really tie up enemy forces for some time. Let's have a look at some of the monsters. First up is Ushpapti, and in the End Times Overhaul, they're very good defenders, and an anvil of a unit, with high melee defense, good armour, and with a potent attack. And if you have a Necrotech nearby, they can heal them, as well as the front. They can hold the front as well with Skeleton Warriors. Naturally, you can give them the Great Bow, and in their hands it's got a 255 range, meaning they can do huge damage, which is out of range of most factions, with obviously the exception of artillery. They can cause solid damage before the enemy get close. And when it comes to the hand-to-hand fighting, they're just as good as the previous unit. The last unit I'm going to look at is the Classic Chariot, to see how this Overhaul deals with it. As you can tell from the cards, they have lower armour, but it's just as quick. Their melee attack is much improved, and a bit more melee defense, but the damage and the charge is pretty much the same as vanilla. So on the whole, the two kings are a bit more tanky than in the vanilla settings. Well, you got units to hold their front line, then you can use your flanking units to charge around and use those mighty constructs to do the damage. With the constant heals from their magic, means that they can be very, very difficult to break down. But they do sometimes yak a bit of damage, so make sure you've got a nice balance to your faction. Onto the Vampire Coast now, and of course this is a very heavily armoured with a lot of missile units which specialise in gunpowder. So obviously these new changes, this is obviously a good faction to go to. But I just want for you to remind you that the arcs of fire are different to vanilla settings, such as missiles from gunpowder weapons have a much lower arc, so you have to get them into exactly the right place for them to take advantage of this huge killing power that they do have. As there's no new units to talk about, let's go straight in and look at the pirate deckhands. Again, showing off the traditional Vocis units from vanilla settings. Here they are actually not as bad as you think and can do a lot of damage. But as the nature of this faction and most undead factions, they're very slow. One thing before I move on to other particular units, I just want to show off the Sirens, which have a very, very high melee defense, which is one of the few units in the roster capable of shutting down the enemy. Make it a real grind for them, especially because they're ethereal, and with that very high melee defense means they can be a right issue to get through. With the gunpowder improvements, as you might expect, the deck gunners can do real damage, just like the Ratling guns which I've talked about before. They're a devastating force, and this range is even longer than the Ratling guns. To get this huge damage down, you got to make sure the Irons of Fire are perfect for this unit, as they can really slow down the enemy and really destroy units by the bucket load. Of course, getting them into these particular positions are difficult because they are such slow moving units, unlike the Ratling gun, which at least got the Scathing carrying them, make him a bit quicker. The Necrofex is a beast in this version, with superior damage potential, but the actual combat stats are some of the strong missile monster units when compared. Of course, shooting from range is where it shines, and can really carve up the front line along with your other choices. With this faction on the whole, remember the melee is much stronger than it is vanilla settings, and Death Guard are very, very scary on the charge. So if you get the right balance between infantry and missiles, you have a particularly interesting faction to play. Of course, speed is their biggest issue, and you only got a few options to counter their speed. So make sure you got a good wide range of units spread across the entire battlefield, and with a couple of cheap meat shield units to protect your vital missile units. On to the other undead faction now, the Vampire Counts. With the first unit, the Impenitent, which are resurrected Fragments at 300 points, which is actually cheaper than the zombies. Of course they would die in their droves against missile units, and most infantry can cut through them, but they do possess quite a bit of damage on the counter. And there's of course a lot of them, and they have even got a bit of AP as well, so don't just charge straight in, think about who you're charging. Next we have the Revenants at 400, which is the same type of unit as the zombies, but more balanced for defense. Where the zombies themselves actually have 47 weapon strength, so when they hit they can cause damage, but their melee defense is pretty low. Meaning you have to again rethink these zombie encounters. This unit is just another way to block up the enemy, and is very good at it, and it can also get some kills now and again. And with of course the undead magic boosting them, they can definitely hold the front line. In this particular case though, their leadership is awful, so put these in the centre and have some good strong flanking units next to them, and make sure the back line is well protected so they don't go crumbling. There are some new units. We have the Encased, a halberd unit with very high defense and a decent attack, but very few models. Also, their health pool is not huge, so when they take to the Vocis, they really fear it, even them, though their armour is above 100, which usually gives them a fighting chance in close combat. And of course, use that magic to heal them. As a faction, they are more tanky, and the meat shield units, as mentioned, have a bit more punch to them. Again, like all the undead factions, are slow moving, and we are a cav, so I'll show off the Blood Knights here. Starts with a noticeable small unit size than some of the others you've seen. But of course they hit hard on the charge and have the frenzy ability, so add that damage as well. Their monsters are really hard hitting but act for defense, so be aware of that, and as an example here are the Vargeists, which are not undead and cause a lot of damage, but they have no armour and no defense means they can be cut up quite easily. So be careful with all these monster units as they are all similar, with high melee attack but low melee defense, and most have weak armour. With the Warriors of Chaos, I have only one unit to talk about, the Chaos Dragon. As you can see, it's a fearsome dragon, as I've shown you with the High Elves version. With a ton of damage, and yes, that's still with unlimited fire breath, making it a truly fearsome beast. When it comes to the faction itself, on the screen I have the chosen Axe Warriors, which of course can be given the marks, the 4 Chaos God marks, as I outlined earlier in the video for Norska. These marks can be given to any chosen units, the Inspiring Champs and the Forsaken, which by the way for the Inspiring Champs is the only of these units which have melee attack and defense around the same at 60, while all the others have much higher melee attack and very weak melee defense because we're Chaos, and of course we attack when we're Chaos. In End Times, as the name suggests, they're a harder faction with more damage across the board, and as you can see from this Chaos spawn, a nightmare to kill with a ridiculously high huge hit point value. With a name in the End Times, you can expect the Chaos to give you a run for the money now, and the Duke has really put a lot of effort into making them very tough indeed. Their infantry is about best, one of the best in the Overhaul, and if you add these marks as well, making them even more flexible than they would be normal. Their main weaknesses, as in vanilla, is the lack of range, so make sure you get some quick units to chase any missile units down. As an example, here are the Chaos Knight stats, and of 80 models, and with the mark of Corn attached, you can only guess on how much damage they could cause on the charge. And finally, the Wood Elves. 2 new units to talk about. The Kindred of Yokoi is a different choice instead of your standard spears, adding more defense and a decent attack with reasonable damage. This allows you to each one with different variants instead of the traditional front line of spears. And yes, you go with the Dryads or the Treekin. Next we have a cheap cavalry option, Grady Answers, great combats and super cheap at 700, but they will disappear to all missile fire, and anyone getting past a decent defense, they would disappear quite quickly because of their low health pool. Naturally, the Wood Elves are the king of archers, and I would say it's no different in this overhaul. So here are the Weight War Archers. Great as you can see, with boosting similar damage to the High Elves Armoured Archers which you saw before. But on a Weight Watchers scale, they have better AP values, increased by 4 on the shot, and they have 100 models. And of course, the Weight Watchers have much better melee stats. Next up, the Wild Riders are great in combat as well as fast, but they lack armour for survivability. But remember, they have that frenzy and the charge boost as well, so they hit hard and are one of my favourite cavalry units. Onto the Forest Spirits and the Treekin, which are just as tough in vanilla and even tougher in the End Times, with huge melee defense and health pool, but of course slow. And on the damage front, they do a bit, but their low melee attack means they don't hit as often as you would hope. But of course, when they do, they got that magical damage. Give out a bit, as long as they take a lot. It's definitely a good holding unit. With even higher buffs in the wooded areas for this particularly interesting faction. They of course possess the great speed and hitting power of any elf faction, but they are weak and have not the greatest health pools. So it's important to mix in with your Treekin to make sure they can actually tank a front line. And of course take advantage of your superior archers, because you have 0 artillery in this faction, so you really have to rely on that. And don't forget, you still got that forest dragon to add a bit more monstrous and a bit more damage to those front line. Thanks for watching this video about the End Times Overhaul by the Duke. As you can tell, it was just a brief look at each faction, any new units they have, and just a comparison to vanilla settings for some other units, which I just picked because I thought they were quite interesting to compare. In the next video, we're going to go straight into our campaign, and I'm hopefully going to show you some more in-depth look at how the campaigns are going and how I think each one faction is playing. I obviously can't do all the factions, but I'll pick out some of my favourites, which I know quite well, and we'll go over them. So until then, thanks for watching, and I'll see you there.